children about the dog has heard that the ICO are quite keen on it, so we may try to make a bit of a appearance at some point. My experiences in terms of information governance, I've worked within the field of information governance now for 20 years. Back in the day of preparing for access to information and the FOI regime coming into place. One of my favourite years was definitely 2008. I was
on our live services. So customers are also coming back to us more. Sometimes it's for additional information, sometimes it's to challenge our decisions and they're not happy with the way we've dealt with their complaint. This all means additional work for us. We're also seeing a huge increase in challenging behaviour from customers, and this is a really big thing for us. And we know that many of you are seeing this too. It's clear that other regulators have similar experiences from the discussions that we've been having with them. So we understand some of the struggles you're facing because we're seeing them too. And this increasing demand will obviously have an impact on our resource. So that's the second thing. The rise in our workload and customer demand means it's increasingly difficult to stay on top of the complaints coming to us and the secondary work needed when a customer's not satisfied with either the outcome or the service that we've provided. Our case officers are dealing with more complaints on a monthly basis than ever before. The ever-increasing demand for our service is impacting our ability to respond quickly and effectively. We want to consider new ways of handling data protection complaints, so we're currently consulting on changes we're proposing to make. And this is the way that we will deal with the complaints that we receive. There's more information available about this on our website if you want to know more, and you can also comment on our proposals. The closing date for comments is the 31st of October, so you've still got plenty of time. We're also recruiting more staff to help meet with the demand, which is a positive thing, but then we have to devote time and resources to the training of these staff. And this again places more strain on our finance resources. And then the last thing, as Dom has highlighted, is the increase in the use of AI. So I think it's fair to say that ChatGPT is now eating away at our case officers' lunch breaks. They used to send a response out at, say, 12 o'clock, go for a bite to eat, knowing that any comeback would take a few days. Now they're logging back on to see that ChatGPT has chewed up the response and spat out pages and pages of complicated jargon in a response. They then have to wade through this to find the relevant points to respond to. And there's anecdotal evidence that many other bodies are seeing the same, so it's not just us. So that's our story. I'll now hand you over to Em, who will talk you through some case studies.
Thanks, Victoria. So we've talked about the challenges and you've heard a bit about our story. So now I want to share with you the challenge and a bit about our story. I'll share some examples. So let's start with a large organisation of many departments, each holding different pieces of customer information. One department had a form that customers needed to complete, but the information required to fit it in was actually held by another department. So what did this obviously led to a spike in SARS, duplicated work, delays, and a lot of frustration. But the organisation recognised this issue and they redesigned the process. So now customers can access the information they need at the filling in the form. No SAR required. That simple change has saved time for everyone and significantly reduced the number of SARs received by that organisation. Now let's look at organisations working with people who've experienced being in care. Some of these organisations began creating life stories for individuals as they leave care, a safe, trusted environment, often with a social worker or a trusted adult present. What's the impact of this? Well, people can ask questions in real time without needing requesting of their information. Often, if they do submit a SAR, it may be much more focused, perhaps just seeking clarity on 1 or 2 events that have happened. It's a kinder way to share someone's childhood history, and for the organisation, it means less redaction, less admin, and just a stronger relationship with that individual. These examples show that when organisations take the time to understand why someone is requesting information, they can design better, more human-centred processes. It's not just about ticking a compliance box. It's about empathy, it's about efficiency, and it's about trust. We've seen this in our own complaints work too. Case officers the dedicated contact for a customer whose behaviour had previously led to restrictions. Since those restrictions were lifted, the case officer worked closely with the customer to understand their adjustments and reason behind their difficulties. These difficulties, not just us, but also with many other organisations, we've been able to explain these challenges to those other organisations and encourage compromise. The result? Better outcomes for the customer and resolutions for the organisations involved. The customer even asked to speak to the case officer's manager just to sing their praises. Another example was of a distressed man who called our helpline and asked the case officer, how long does an organisation have to handle a SAR? Well, we all know the answer to that is 30 days. But when our case officer gave that response, he said, not in this scenario, it isn't. Instead of doubling down and repeating the rule, our case officer asked, well, what scenario is that? He then explained that his father was in hospital in Spain and he needed that information, some information to be sent from a hospital in the UK to the hospital his father was in. Ultimately, he'd misunderstood what a SAR was. And by taking a moment to understand the why behind his question, our case officer was able to reassure him and to explain to him the most suitable process for getting the information to the right place. It also helped him to feel heard. These were complaints clearly drafted using AI. It's adding to the workload, there's no doubt about it, and our teams are feeling the pressure. But instead of focusing on the fact that the request was AI generated, we're encouraging our staff to look beyond the words and to connect with the person behind them, because there's always a real person there, someone who might be unsure about their rights or struggling to articulate their concerns and who has turned to AI for help. And that's okay. AI can give people the confidence to speak up. But when we reach out, offer support and clarify things, we're not just resolving a request, we're building trust, we're showing empathy, and we're helping somebody to feel heard. It comes back to understanding why someone is making a request. When we do that, when we put people first, we don't just improve processes, we create better outcomes, we reduce friction, and we build stronger relationships. I'm going to hand over back to Dom now, who's going to talk a little bit more about understanding why and give you some takeaways that you can take away to your organisation.
Thanks, Sam. And I should agree that there is why we need to understand the time a subject access request or another data protection request or complaint. And what I want to do now, because I know you're all eager data protection, information governance professionals who want to have some real tangible actions from this, is to take a minute now to understand how you can apply some of this within your own organisation. So if you're able to do so and it's useful, you may want to grab a pen and paper and draw a line down the middle with a heading of understand the why, similar to the slide. And we're going to have some actions for you. And we're going to have some actions to articulate how you might be able to take some of these things away. And because you're all information governance professionals, I know you'll love nothing more than a KPI. So I've got 4 KPIs for you to take away. There's going to be 2 on each one. So we'll start with actions for you. And your first KPI to write down on actions for you is keep people informed. This is really important to set the tone early and enter that dialogue with the individual. Often, as we know, something's perhaps gone wrong. They already don't trust your organisation or feel that your organisation's not given the service that they require. And so far, it's really important to have that conversation with the person at the other end and understand what is it that they want, what is it that they're after. Now, by doing this, it's not about challenging them. It's about understanding how you can help and explaining that to them. And if you can do that, as you have the conversation and you explore what they want the information for and why they need it, what that might allow you to do is then spot any potential challenges and manage any expectations from the offset. So rather than it being sort of back and forth emails, it's a proper conversation where you can understand that, manage some expectations, and then you might even see that there's another avenue where they're perhaps better served to get that information, and you can potentially signpost them to that. So by keeping people informed, it's all about having those real conversations, because those real conversations beat emails. Another point to remember on keeping people informed is that no update is still an update. So if it's taken a few weeks, don't just leave it lurking. Make sure that you contact the individual and tell them there's still no further update to be had. It reassures them that you're looking at their information, that you're looking at their request, and you're trying to assist them, and that may take some time. This is a really good way of building that initial trust and will hopefully help further down the line, particularly if there are queries around perhaps redactions of information that they're not entitled to. So this leads us nicely onto the second KPI that I want you to write down on actions for you. And that's to keep people involved. This is really important, especially when someone's using an AI tool like ChatGPT, because if you keep them involved in the conversation, it makes it easier to break that down and might actually make them a little bit less reluctant to use those tools because they feel like they're being heard by a human being at the other end. It's a really tricky one, isn't it, ChatGPT? You know, it's throwing out lots of things. We know that sometimes it's misleading, sometimes it's not quite right, and people often won't quite understand it themselves. So what's a really good thing to do here is to try and call people in when they're using it. Don't call them out for using it, call them in. Acknowledge their dissatisfaction or their confusion around the response that you've provided, and perhaps gently raise the possibility that you've perhaps noticed they may have used an AI tool because you understand that it's quite a complex matter and you want to help get to the bottom of it. And ask them specifically what it is that they're unsure about and try and get down to the bottom of it that way. Break it down step by step. If you can do this, then again, it really builds trust and it shows to the individual that you're willing to go through it with them. And if you've done this on the back of keeping people informed and informing them at the start of the process, they might just be less hesitant to try and use one of these things. So don't be afraid to sort of mention that they've used that tool, but don't do it in a way where it's sort of humiliating them or making them feel like they shouldn't have used it, but call them in, have that conversation where you can. By doing that, you can really build trust and encourage that real dialogue. And most of all, it will humanize you. And obviously, we understand that there's always a human being behind that AI tool. And by inviting them into the conversation, it also humanizes you, which is really important because often these individuals will forget that there's a human being at the other end actually trying to help them. So those are potential actions for you to take when you've got the request. But I appreciate, and I've heard this, you know, with the brilliant session this morning on the life of a DPO, that it quite a lonely, isolating, and it can be a real challenge. And it's often other parts of the organisation that generate the subject access requests and other data protection complaints and requests that come through. So there's 2 KPIs that I want you to take back potentially for your organisation to try and get colleagues on board and to try and sell the benefits to them. So the first KPI on actions for your organisation is keep people interested. And when I talk about people here, I mean the people within your organisation. Keep them interested in what you're doing. Many colleagues won't realise how their work is actually generating more complaints and more requests for you to deal with. So if you can, and if you've got the colleagues to help you do this, it's worth doing some analysis to understand which business areas generate the most SARS. Departments love getting data and spreadsheets and charts and all sorts of information about them, particularly if they're being highlighted as perhaps a risk or a poor performer. If you can sort of show them that and show them the work that they're generating for you and talk to them on their language, then that's a really good way of getting buy-in from other departments. So for instance, if it's a customer service department, rather than talking about that they shouldn't be generating SARS, talk about how you're spotting a clear dissatisfaction in the service that they're providing because you've seen an increase of SARS come from their area, and that perhaps them being more transparent and being more open might reduce some of this and show the burden that it's creating for you and other parts of the business. By doing this, you can start opening those conversations and using that analysis. If you want to go a step further with analysis, something that we have seen work to some success, and again, we'd encourage you to explore, is actually putting out a survey to requesters around why they've made the request. As Em talks about in one of the examples, we've seen big organisations where individuals come up with a barrier going down one process and have to make a subject access request to the same organisation to try and get the information to allow them to continue with that application. So what you could do is spot those trends, see why people are making those requests, and see if there's internal efficiencies. So that way, rather than frustrating lots of processes within your organisation, you can think, well, what can we align here? What can we potentially do that will create an internal efficiency? So that helps your other departments, other teams, and also it helps your customers. So it makes it more efficient. And I know John Edwards mentioned this morning in his Q&A about being smart. And this is a really good way of doing that, is thinking about, okay, what analysis can we collect? And if you can do that, you're more likely to draw colleagues in, because it's less about teaching them the law and more about the benefits for their business area and how they can assist. So after keeping people interested, the next thing you can do with your people in your organisation is keep people inspired. So this is your final KPI that I'm going to ask you to consider. So keeping people inspired, it's all about empowering them. So once you've got that analysis, once you've worked through which areas might be generating more work or which areas might be able to assist you, this is when you can then go to them and help them understand what they can potentially deal with themselves, what they can advise customers, and take some of that heavy burden off you and the busy workload that you have. How many of you have received a request, come through, and you thought, this is business as usual? You could have just provided this. This is just an email. And I know that happens. It happens. I've seen it happen. I've seen DPOs tell me that happens. And this is coming from a place where people are scared of getting data protection wrong. They're scared of getting the request wrong, and they don't feel empowered. So it's not that they're passing on work, it's this fear of getting it wrong. So if you can use that information that you've done in the keep people interested part, you can then start saying, well, actually, these are the sorts of things which you could deal with as business as usual. Here's what you can just share. And you may even be able to have conversations with other departments who may be able to do some of the processing of those requests for you. We've seen one example recently where an organisation went to their HR department and have come up with a system where the SARS for internal employees go through to the HR department and they deal with them. They have all that information, and if there's anything that they think they're unsure of, they can go to their data protection team. But this has been a much better employee experience for those that are making SARS. It's meant that HR are on top of it and are able to control that information. It's also made them think about things like retention policies and how they're storing information to make sure that they can access it because they have that level of responsibility. And it's allowed that organisation to then focus their data protection resources on the more complex things that are coming from external customers and service users. The final thing you can do to help keep colleagues inspired, as well as talking to them on their language and getting them to understand how this can improve their work and empower them, is to share resources that the ICO has put out there. And a really good one is the ripple effect. This really shows that human impact behind data protection. And obviously that's what we're all about, putting people first. And if you can emphasize that, then we can go a long way in sort of getting people on board and hopefully improving the situation for you in terms of the climate of rising SARS and rising AI use and all the other challenges that we've touched on. I appreciate that's quite a lot to take in. And I appreciate I've given you 4 KPIs. Some of them I know you'll already be doing. Some of them perhaps you've not thought about, and some of them are perhaps things you would like to work on. What I would like you to do is think about which KPI can you take away today and start working on or start looking to improve. And if you can do all of them, fantastic. But pick one for now if that's your starting point. Thank you for listening. We will now go to a Q&A. I'm sure you've got lots of questions around this in terms of data protection complaints, data protection requests, as well as how the ICO might be handling things. So we're going to go to a Q&A now. And thank you for your time and your attention. And please do keep in touch with us.
Thanks, Dom. So yes, you're right. There are a lot of questions in the Q&A box. So I'm going to be asking the questions. Obviously, I'll jump in with some answers as well. I'm going to start with one that it's like I think it's the top liked one, which is the ICO frequently contacts organisations following a complaint, often issuing an opinion or decision based solely on the complaint's account. This is sometimes done without first engaging with the organisation involved, which can result in an unbalanced assessment that lacks consideration of the full context and supporting evidence. Such an approach places a significant additional burden on the organisation and may intensify already challenging interactions with the complainant. A more balanced process, one that involves gathering evidence from all relevant parties, could lead to fairer outcomes and potentially simplify matters for everyone involved, including the complainant. And we've had a couple of questions that are of a similar vein, so I'm going to pass that over to one of you guys to start us off.
So, Victoria, I'm thinking if you want to talk about the consultation, which you mentioned earlier, but before you do that, I'm happy to answer the sort of common process. So yeah, we acknowledge that this happened. I think what's really important to understand is with the volumes of complaints we have, case officers are providing a non-statutory outcome. It's not legally binding, sorry, I should say, outcome. And what they're doing is they are taking a risk-based approach in terms of the likeliness of whether they think further action needs to be required from the organisation. Whilst we appreciate there's some occasions where perhaps they don't get this right or there is missing information, we find that on the majority of cases that actually we do come to the right conclusion. And the old way was to write out from information, and sometimes there would be months of chasing back and forth, and that didn't help anyone. However, we do that is a risk, and with the workloads that we have, we also need to make sure that we're filling the biggest value and where there's the most significant harm. So that's why we do consultation. I'll let Victoria now come in and talk a little bit more about why we want to do that consultation and how this might address some of this.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think the consultation I referred to is, as I say, it's live at the moment. We're looking at the way, because obviously the volume of complaints that we're getting, as I said, has gone up massively. And what we want to do is our resource efforts on these that we've got more value in terms of we can do an agent piece with the perhaps they're not fully aware of what they need to do and the responsibilities. And we want to focus on the complaints where there's real detriment to people as well. We've seen a rise in a lot of complaints where, certainly within the sort of sectors I work in, there's a lot of complaints around customer service issues. So although people are bringing in an element of perhaps data protection within it, the main reason behind the complaint is due to a customer service issue that's arisen. So we want to differentiate between the types of complaints that we spend more time on, and the purpose of the consultation is to look at how we might be able to do our complaints. Less time focused on the ones where we don't think there's sort of value or any work that we can necessarily do with the organisation to make their processes or their procedures better. And we'll look at more of recording those complaints that we get, and then doing some work around gathering information around those volumes of complaints about the ones that we're not spending as much time on, to see if that highlights anything that we can look at. So the ones that we will be taking forward and the ones that we'll be spending more time on, obviously are the ones that we think there's more value in those complaints. And that gives us more of an opportunity to explore those complaints a bit more, devote a bit more time to them. If there are things that we need to ask, we can certainly go to the organisation and ask them. So we're hoping that will see perhaps more of the direct dialogue with organisations than perhaps that we've been doing before.
Yeah, and I would just finally say on that point as well, if you do get back to the point around how we manage complaints, if you do dispute it, please contact the case officer and ring them. You know, the case officers are more than happy to talk this through. We will change decisions where we have to. We appreciate that this is something that happens. You know, we've heard about it for multiple years now since we changed this approach. We understand the risks, but we also are very willing to have those conversations and to get it right. And it all comes back to what we've been saying. It's about not just real conversations with the customer or the requester, but also with our case officers. So please do pick up the phone and chat to them.
Thanks, Dom and Victoria. There's a lot of comments as opposed to questions in the chat as well about we're generally dealing with customers who are already at the end of their tether with the organisation, and we get the brunt of it and can't build trust as trust is already gone. Or comments about AI is weaponising SARS even more than before. And also I saw something about we already do everything that you're suggesting. I think, as I said, these aren't really questions, but I think it's worth us just sort of touching on them to say we absolutely recognise that things are difficult at the moment, and they seem to be getting more difficult. And if you're doing everything that you can, we will take that into account. If a complaint comes to us, we'll look at that in the round. And although, as Dom said before about the way we're currently in the position where we have to get through our complaints that we're in, we definitely do listen if you can come back to us and give us any more information. And we're very aware that it's a difficult situation, often difficult situation that you're in. There's other questions that so can the ICO do more to educate data subjects in what they will get out of a SAR, i.e. what is and isn't personal data, that it shouldn't be used for pre-litigation or complaints? Many individuals have unreasonable expectations and don't understand when data they're expecting isn't disclosed because it isn't within the scope of a SAR.
Yeah, so I think on educating the public, I mean, we do have our sub-pages on our website, and we have our live chat and advice line services. However, I think what's at the crux here is the fact that individuals are perhaps going down the wrong process to get their information. And often individuals come to us after they've been to the organisation. Most people aren't aware of their rights, and I think they get perhaps confused with the process. I think that's where it's a real challenge. And I completely hear what people are saying in terms of, you know, some people just want their information. They're not interested in anything else. And it's a real challenge for all of us. I think we want to do more in that. Things like the Ripple Effects campaign have helped us reach things like charities, where we can now have conversations with those who perhaps assist individuals. I think don't be afraid to highlight our website to people in terms of if, you know, they're trying to use it for the wrong process and it's not their personal data, trying to explain that. I think where you can, if you can signpost or explain to people the process for them to get information, if it's something like litigation, what are the appropriate steps for them to take? And that comes back to that first point around keeping people informed for me, because it's about, if you can have that conversation, and I know it's easier said than done when people are perhaps frustrated and distressed and unhappy with your organisation. But if you can have that and try and come from a place of wanting to help, I think even if that wanting to help doesn't mean having to respond to their subject access request with every single piece of information, but it comes from a place of understanding why they want that information and where you can potentially signpost them. I do completely get that it's easier said than done. And we know that none of the things that we suggested are a silver bullet, but it's about, if you can, trying to lean into those conversations as best you can.
I'll just add in there as well, in terms of the proposals that we're doing to change the way that we look at complaints. I think also that it gives us an opportunity for the cases that we're not going to spend a great deal of time on, but to look for the themes. And I think the themes that we're picking out around certain areas, we're looking then to produce more guidance within our area for customers as well. Because, you know, the things that you often struggle with, we often struggle with as too. And we get people who come to us, where Dom sort of alluded to, in terms of really the SAR process isn't the right way to go. And there's different ways to get the information. So we will look to produce more guidance based on the themes that we're seeing when we get the complaints in.
Okay, so the next question is the ICO committed to helping your case officers with complaints coming in that are often duplicate or crossover or repetitive from the same requesters? It's also since the organisation's resources, and often we feel unsupported from the ICO. And then there's another one that was about how we handle complaints which are, I'm trying to find it, but from memory, it was about how we handle complaints which cover many different things, so SARS and housing disrepairs and what each.
I mean, I'll start on the sort of duplicate, repetitive complaints. Yes, we do try to identify those. I'll be honest, the casework system that we use is not the best in terms of allowing us to quickly gather that information, but we do aim to try and find it. It's sometimes quite easy to identify when you've got the duplicate and the repetitive complaints and the individuals bringing those duplicate complaints to us. But we do try to identify that. And again, you know, if we're contacting you, then it's always helpful if you can provide us with further information about possible duplicate, you know, complaints that you've had that you're dealing with, or the issues that you're dealing with that particular individual. But we will try to find, as I say, identify and find duplicate and repetitive ones.
Yeah, and I think on the second question, that's a really challenging one for us, because obviously there's only so much within our remit that we can do, and obviously there is often an overlap. There is often other issues at play. I think what we've tried to do over the last few years is really try and emphasise to our case officers to have those conversations with people. So rather than just sending out a letter saying this is just a data protection matter, explaining that they understand there are other issues there, where they can signposting, but trying to sort of be direct, but also acknowledging the fact that, you know, there are other issues which we can't assist with. But again, the key for me is trying to explain that as early as possible, because it helps manage the expectations. It's not a silver bullet, as I've said. It's not going to make the individual all of a sudden go, oh, okay, I'm on board with it now. But it does make it gradually easier as you have those more conversations with the customer. So I would definitely recommend, well, what we try to do with it is we recommend to our case officers that they break down the complaint and acknowledge those issues and explain why we're not going to look at them. And if that's something that your organisation is facing, then I would recommend that you look to do the same thing. So don't be afraid to acknowledge it.
Okay, so the next question, and this is specifically about the presentation we've just done. So how would you suggest we go about finding out the why? Tricky customers don't tend to react well to feeling like they are being questioned. What is a good question to ask besides asking for clarification of their request? Are we meant to directly ask for their motivation or desired outcome?
It's a really good question. And I think that is the skill that makes it, you know, really difficult. I would suggest that you offer that phone call and you come from a place of, I just want, this has just landed on my desk. I don't know anything about it. I want to help you and I want to understand the best approach for me to find the information that you're entitled to, and just want a bit of a background. And I think let them do the talking and try and listen and ask those prompting questions, and try not to come from a place of, right, I've got your SAR, what do you want? I think it's about calling them in and going, I can see that it looks like something's gone wrong here, you're frustrated, what is it specifically? Because I think if you've not dealt with that individual before, whilst they're frustrated with your organisation, you can almost sort of act as a bit more of a moderator between the other departments in your organisation and the customer, and starting that. So I think it's really just going into it with an open mind of, I'm just going to listen to get that background, because they may say something that then actually helps you manage those expectations. So for instance, if they're saying, oh, I need it for litigation or whatever, and you're realizing you're not going to get this, you can perhaps start preparing the groundwork, but also doing it from a place of helping. And I think if you proactively contact them, it automatically signals a sense of you want to help and that you're interested in them. So it's a bit of a soft skill. It doesn't always work perfectly, but it certainly goes a long way. And we've seen some good results within the ICO where we've tried to do that with individuals. And sometimes even when they've been difficult with colleagues, just saying, look, I just start from the beginning. I just want to hear where you're coming from so I can understand how I can best help you. And if you emphasize the fact that I'm doing this because I want to help you, that's a good way of starting those conversations.
Okay, so what's the advice or recommendation we have for dealing with data subject requests that involve or include aggressive or insulting language, which obviously also takes a toll on those reading and dealing with such negative requests?
Yeah, I mean, as we say, we can sympathise with you on a lot of these points. You know, we, as I said in the section I was talking about, we're all facing challenging behaviour from individuals. We see it a lot in our correspondence. We see it a lot on our live services. You know, we have people who, as I said, you know, we're terminating more calls than ever. So we do know that this goes on, and obviously it's not pleasant. And we try to do as much as we can to work with our staff to sort of train them on how to deal with these particular situations. But, you know, we also restrict people. We also restrict the access to our services, and we call people out. We issue warnings to people. And, you know, equally, people who are being rude and aggressive, then they should be called out, and we shouldn't tolerate behaviour like that. So, you know, like I say, we do everything we can to protect our staff when we encounter these sorts of behaviours, and we would encourage organisations and people to do the same.
Thanks, Victoria. Okay, so the next question is, SARS are costing businesses huge amounts of money. Has the ICO ever analysed the cost of SARS to the UK economy? I don't think we have, is the answer to that. I guess we could probably take that away. It wouldn't be our department, would it, I guess, but I think that's something we can take away.
Yeah, definitely. No, I'm not sure on that, and I guess it varies. Often we find that organisations with systems, often unfortunately it can be in the public sector where you've not got the systems that can be an added drain. So it's definitely something for us to go away and understand. So if that's useful for organisations, I'm sure we can explore that.
And then there's a comment on AI is weaponizing SARS, which I think is probably something we'd like to address. So I'll pass that over to Dom.
Yeah, so I think it is, and this is what I'm trying to talk about and calling people in, because it's new to everyone. We haven't got the answers in terms of how do we address AI, but I think it's trying to not get drawn into that. I appreciate it's easier said than done, but I think it's being brave enough to sort of say, it appears that you're using AI. You've thrown up lots of information at me. I'm just curious as to what it is specifically that you're unhappy with. And we appreciate that there will be some individuals that won't want to engage with that process and that won't want to engage, and they'll just want to pursue it further. But at least if you can document that you've tried that and you've done that, when it then does come through to a complaint to us, we can see that you've engaged with them, and that actually is one step in terms of dealing with it. Is, even if nothing else, it shows that you've attempted it. So yes, I understand where that's coming from, but I think what we have to really do, as it is a really challenging time in the data protection field at the moment with these increasing volumes and with the increase of AI, is to try and remain empathetic, to try and understand that there are human beings at the end of that process. However unreasonable some of them may be and how they may be acting, doesn't mean that we shouldn't try our best to understand what it is that's motivating them and to try and have those conversations. For everyone that it doesn't work with, there will be someone who you can potentially win round. So I think don't be afraid to call it out. Don't just try and break it down in emails, because then they think that you're not listening. I think having that and putting them on the spot, and again, it's where a phone call is really useful, because you can acknowledge that they're unhappy with something, and asking them to be specific. And if they have thrown out 20 pages of ChatGPT at you, it's going to be difficult for them to pinpoint it. So it puts you in that upper hand to correspond. Whereas if you're going through an AI response, trying to respond to every point, all they're going to do is copy and paste that back into ChatGPT. So it's trying to avoid that. So where you can, try and call them in. We're not under any illusion that this is really difficult, but I think it's a soft tactic that might work with some cases and will give you the upper hand in some cases. But we appreciate this can't be done in isolation. It has to be done with working with your organisation, which is why we wanted to focus on what can you do with those departments in your organisation who might be able to assist you.
So I think we've got probably time for one more question, which is just a quick question. We've had a few comments and questions about the fact that do people think that the ICO can award compensation, and is this the reason why we're seeing more complaints, and is that a reason why people are complaining to the organisations as well?
Well, we see quite a few complaints that come in where people are asking for compensation, but obviously we don't provide compensation. Is it a driver? I don't know. It's difficult to say, really. It might be, but we're quite clear in terms of the advice that we give on our website. We're very clear about compensation and that we can't provide it. So we do, despite that, though, having that advice there, and we do see that a lot of people do come to us and talk about compensation. And I think that's probably the world that we're living in as well, because I think, there's a bit of a compensation culture, and I think people often will look for compensation in different areas.
I think we're always reviewing our website as well. So we're always looking for ways to make things clearer, and definitely as part of the DPR transformation plans going forward, that's something that we'll be looking at as well. So yeah, it's definitely something that we'll try and make more clear if it's not clear at the moment. That's pretty much the end of our session. So from us, thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much for your engagement. There's been a lot of comments as well as questions. So yeah, I'd like to say thank you very much.
Yeah, massive thank you. And it's great to see all the comments around, you are a real community. You're going through the similar challenges. We're seeing that in the complaints. We hope you found some of this helpful, but please do stay in touch, and do please keep asking those questions of us, because we want to be the best supportive regulator that we can be.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.